All right, so we have our vector type added into a Photoshop document that's 16 by 20 by 350 pixels per inch. And I've played with arranging the spot illustration. What I don't like is that really close tension of the in with the crown, right? But I do like how the wing is overlapping the G. It makes the wing feel lighter and gets people to really pay attention to not just the text, but also the image. So how can I play with this before I lock the black type? I can, as a smart object, I'll just make a duplicate of it so you can see, keep it as a smart object, but in Photoshop, hit Command T, and I can warp it, or skew it, or distort it, right? I can transform it in these different ways. And just shift it a little bit. I can scale it differently. I can tilt it up on one side and down on the other. All without hurting it as a vector. Sometimes it's helpful to have guides, because I basically want the G and the C to start on the same line. So that allows me to raise it up a little bit here. And you're just always looking for readability, right? So always changing. Now that gap works to my satisfaction. Hit return, still a vector. Still perfectly clean at whatever size I want to make it. Okay, now, how do I finish this as a poster? Well, before I can do a color variation on the title, which is the second requirement, I want to pick a background for it. So if I look at my inspirations, this is a pretty simple single color background, that blue. It actually has a slight pattern in it. And so maybe I do something like that. And instead of compositing it in, like we've done in past projects, I'm just going to make a new background layer. And then I'm going to say Edit Fill. And instead of doing gray or black, I'm going to say Fill with a color. Now I have to choose the color. And whenever you get the color selection, you can use it to select a color, right? But it's hard to tell from these millions of colors. Or you can select on something that's already in your image, right? So I might try something like that. But it'll just be one pixel color or something like this. And 100%, there we go. Now, that gives me something to kind of work with, right? But what if I want to make that background more interesting? Maybe I want to add a gradation to it. So I'm going to make an additional layer. This time I'm going to use the paint bucket tool, but what's on top of the paint bucket tool, which is the gradient tool. And this is just like doing a gradient overlay, but you can pick from a lot of the presets. This will do it as actual pixels that can be modified. So let's see, always changing. I don't want too much craziness in the background. But I want to, maybe I'll play with oranges versus the blues. So I'm going to play with this gradient. And what's great about this gradient tool, this gradient fill tool, is I'm just going to drag across the background and it will show you kind of different angles, different scales, and this will all be at 100%. I'm just going to do a pretty straightforward gradient like that. Now what I can do is I can rasterize that by right-clicking, rasterize that gradient, and I can play the merge layers game, right? This is kind of what I was hoping. I chose a complementary color, so when they're mixed at about 50-50, you get to like middle gray, which helps set off my highlights and my shadows. But if I take it down to maybe like 70 something and then change it to dissolve, I get that beautiful texture in the background, right, that I've put into my illustration. So that's a nice way to make a very printable, pretty diverse background. And then I can always composite a texture as well. So let's look for an Art Nouveau, like water pattern. I want something pretty simple. And maybe Art Nouveau is going to be too complicated. Ooh, but I like this seashell pattern. This is an Art Deco, that's perfect. Scalloping pattern. Kind of reminiscent of snake scales. So I can copy that, even though it's a low resolution. I could look on Pixabay, I can find lots of these kind of texture fills. Oh, this one's really kind of interesting. This one is from Shutterstock, so it's a really low resolution. But what I could do is screen grab it, because I don't want any watermarks, right? Just grab that. Go back to Photoshop, and then I can bring some of these things in and play with them. So there's that screenshot. Drop it in, stretch it, hold down Shift so I can change its shape. Just like a texture fill, right? And you can see how blurry it is, but when I play with it in terms of blending modes, right, you can see how effective that can be, and then I can play with its opacity as well. And if I rasterize it, which I want to do, I can actually change its colors. So if I play with hue saturation, I can decide what kind of color I want that background pattern to have. And because it's on a different blending mode, sometimes it disappears almost entirely. So I'm going to pick a pretty warm color like this, and then maybe play with different blending modes. So I want it to be subtle. It's a little too subtle. So have fun when you're creating your background, either through compositing or layering or just painting things in. So hard light's pretty nice. I think overlay is maybe the best, because I like how it's yellow here and goes to kind of pinks and reds at the bottom. Okay, now if I think I'm happy with the shape of my background, right? I can put that all into a folder together. That's my background. And now I can work on color variations of my type. So what's the most basic? The most basic is just make a duplicate of your black vector type. But before I go too much further, why don't I save that as a JPEG just so I can get it to Canvas. So I'm just going to save this file, save a copy, JPEG. In fact, cancel. I'm going to do one more thing. I need to add a border to this. And to do that, I simply take my white layer, and I'm going to go to Image, Canvas Size, and I'm going to grow it 1 inch on each side. So it's going to be 17 by 21 inches, which will give me what's called a bleed edge, a white border. Then I'm just going to say edit fill with that background white, fill it all with white, and now I have a poster with a background and a border. I just don't have color type yet. So this is my black type solution. And instead of saving it as a JPEG, which would take a whole lot of memory, which is fine, but I know this isn't my finished poster, I'm just going to do Command-Shift-4, because this is just for posting to Canvas, and do a screen grab with a black edge, so you can see the edges of my white poster. And that screen grab is what I'm going to submit for my black type requirement. Now my color type requirement. Make a duplicate of the black type, and very basically I can double click on the layer and I can play with layer styles. You know, finding colors. Again, I can pick the color from my design if I want to. And then this is a dissolve at 82%, so you see the black coming through it. That's pretty nice. I can add a stroke to it. Just like all aspects of this, I'm going to put the stroke on the inside. Right? Try it maybe split at the center. But there's already so little gaps between. I am going to put it on the inside. And then maybe I'll do an inner shadow. And you can choose all of these colors. So that is a shadow at normal mode with white. What a shadow usually does is go darker, right? I'm going to do normal mode at a lower opacity, and then I'm going to play with the distance, the choke. And then I can fill it with a gradient as well. And I can play with the angle of that gradient and the actual gradient. Let's see, let's try reversing it. Oh, right now it's radial, that's why. Let's make it linear. Let's make it up to down and reverse. And play with the scale. So all of these, it's kind of previewing it there. All of these little decisions will show you what's going on. You can do drop shadows. And lastly, I'll show you an easy way to do an offset, right? Just to really help it show up, is you can take your original black type, duplicate it again underneath it, and you can grow it. You know, just option, grow it out from the middle like that, and then I can just do a different color overlay for that. So maybe this is going to be white. Right. And maybe I don't want that to be dissolved. Maybe I just want it to be normal. And at full opacity. And then I can add to that a stroke. And again, we're not ever rasterizing. We're never modifying your layer. Add a white stroke on the outside and make it thicker, right? And now, Command T. Kind of bring it in a little bit. There we go. So now, even though I just had a black shape design, I've added kind of two different stroke outlines. I've added an offset. I could add a drop shadow. You know, you can just keep going. But often it can be too much. So what would the drop shadow look like? It would look like that. I can make it blue.